This is the Team Performance Podcast, where we explore issues at the heart of leadership, team development, and organisational culture. I'm your host, Mark Gilroy, and in this episode, we're joined by author and team coach, Andy Fieldhouse. Andy shares his experiences working with multicultural teams, as well as a range of helpful frameworks and coaching tools that he uses to help groups navigate cultural differences. Welcome to the latest episode in our second series of interviews. I'm so happy to be rejoined by Andy Fieldhouse today. So those who've been listening for a while will remember that Andy was on series 1. He's a team coach, consultant and author of the book Getting Teamwork Right. And in our first episode, we took quite a deep dive into the nature of teams, systems, and also how that all plays through his approach when he's working with teams. And we did leave quite a big topic on the table, which we promised we would come back and talk about. But welcome back, Andy.
Thank you very much. Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to have you back. Before we get into any of that, I wanted to start with a question around kind of your history with teams. And what is the most memorable team that you've encountered so far on your journey? That could maybe be a team you were part of, or even a team that you worked with. What's the most memorable team?
Oh, I think this could take up the entire time we have for this chat, because I've obviously seen a lot of teams in my years, because I've been in teams myself, but working as a team coach, working in team building events, I've worked with hundreds of teams. And when you asked me this question, you know what, my mind went initially to the you know, we're more kind of attracted, as it were, to the bad. You know, we respond greater to negative kind of input. So I did think of some of the bad teams, and I remember one that we were doing a team building event. It was kind of like a beach Olympics in the heat here in Dubai, not in the summer, but it was still quite hot. And the leader of the whole team, I mean, there were, I think, about 70 people, kind of arrived late, gave a few, you know, words of welcome at the beginning, everyone standing on the beach waiting for him. Then they all took part in these activities whilst he sat on a sun lounger with a drink, watching them take part, and didn't actually sort of, you know, take part himself. And the culmination of the activity was a crawling under a cargo net, you know, across the sand kind of thing. It was quite physical. Like I say, it was a hot day, and he stood above them, throwing footballs at them as they crawled under the net. I was astonished. I couldn't say anything because it wasn't really my place to do so at the time. But he stood there laughing, just chucking footballs at his employees who were manfully crawling under this cargo net. And I've used that as an example of how not to be a leader. But I vividly remember that you know, pretty poor situation.
Oh my goodness. And again, that was the reason that I chose the word memorable rather than the best team, because people can kind of go with that wherever they want. But what was your read on that then? What do you think was happening there?
I have no idea, you know, like I say, I didn't know them very well. I hadn't been given the permission, or the requirement wasn't to offer that kind of feedback. I mean, I could have done. We could have said, here's one of the big problems you guys have got. So you just let it slide, you know. And that partly was why I'm happier to do coaching of teams, because you can really help with the situations. You're empowered, you're requested, and you contract with the client to say, you know, do you want us to be honest? What do you want from me as a coach? And you know, hopefully there's, we want your feedback, we want your honesty, and then you have, you know, the permission to say, well, this is one of the things that I see. But it wasn't right for me to do that at that time. It was more, the brief was, let's just have some fun on the beach. So you just leave it at that. But then the other one, you know, my own experience of a good team. I think there's two. One from my personal life, you know, playing sport, playing rugby. Played at a team in London. It was great fun, great guys. You know, the kind of physical nature of the sport, you know, what you put on the line. Only as an amateur, I was never a great player, but you know, I loved that. I loved being part of something like that. And then a work team here in Dubai that we worked really, really hard and spent a lot of time and effort on our culture, our relationship as a team, as well as what we did as a business team, and we were successful. And it's a great example of, you know, we were award winning. We won the Great Place to Work award as a company a couple of years in a row, in our category, and we tripled the size of the company in 5 years. So I think it shows an example of get the culture right and the performance follows.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? I remember I sat on a panel once judging an awards ceremony like that, and it was about best L&D team, I want to say. I remember it was an incredible experience, sort of hearing all the stories from all the different candidates. And there was one in particular who I think they ended up coming second, but I remember listening to them thinking, crikey, I would love to be part of your team. There was something really magnetic, because it was the only group where the whole team turned up. All the others, it was just the manager turned up. But in this group, the entire team turned up to do their kind of presentation and their interview. And I was thinking it was magnetic, just seeing them working together, thinking together. You got a real sense of what it would be like to be part of their little tribe. And yeah, it was really contagious.
Yeah. That is a huge thing. The positive contagion of great teams. I've experienced it myself, and when I talk to people about this, and I sort of give this as sort of examples and this concept, loads of people identify with it. They get that attractiveness of when a culture is great, when a team is great, morale is high, people are committed. They kind of, oh, what's that? We want some of that. And there's a quote I use sometimes, and I can't remember. It's from I think it's from a chemist, right? It's from a scientist rather than a human behaviour guy. But the concept being when a system is far from equilibrium, what it takes is these small islands of coherence that can bring the entire system up. And you've got a lot of stuff going on in companies. The teams are like not so good, and yet there's one team over there that just seems to be absolutely firing on all cylinders, and it can raise the teams that are connected around it, almost like a kind of scientific. All these nodules joined by connections. And I've seen that. I joined a team when I was working in recruitment. I had the option of joining a banking team where I could earn lots more money, or an industry team which was dealing with really interesting brands, FMCG, cool kind of companies, or I could join the accountancy practice team, which was recruiting accountants, and it was a little bit drier, a little bit less opportunity for money. But I remember being in this open plan office and seeing the guys on that desks, on that bank of desks, and think, oh, well, look at them. They seem to have fun all the time. And even though it was, a lesser opportunity in terms of money or career, I just went, I want to be part of that. And that does happen. Good teams become attractive to other people, or there's a healthy jealousy. Like, oh, we want what they've got. How do we do that? And trying to learn from them can, like osmosis, can ripple through the organisation.
Yeah, I think the reverse is also true. When you encounter teams where there is, a level of poor culture or toxicity, generally down to kind of management and leadership, and you go,
absolutely,
I think I'm going to keep my distance from that team. That's not a team I want to be part of. I don't want that to rub off on me.
Yeah. It's hard when you're trying to coach with an organisation, and then you find that the problem stems from the leader of the whole damn thing, and then you're like, ooh, this is going to be potentially tricky. But things we have to overcome.
They are, and that's why I guess folk like us have so much work to do still. When it comes to helping support those teams and helping them break those patterns and reveal those patterns and see those patterns.
Yeah, exactly.
The topic that we left off the table last time was around kind of cultural differences in and across teams and how to navigate them. Where do you think's a good place for us to start on that front?
I think understanding where I come from in that regard here, working in the UAE, in the Middle East, as a Westerner, I've been here 16 years, and you just get experience. You pick up stuff when you are living in a different culture to your own home culture, and I've trained as well in working interculturally. My background, as a kid, I've spent most of my life living outside of the UK in a culture that is different to my home culture. As an expat child, my father was a British Airways manager, so he was posted on average 3 years to different countries, and so I grew up in India, Malaysia, Bahrain, Austria, Ireland, before I moved back to the UK, and then I came here 16 years ago. So I've had a lot of experience of working in different cultures. And so it's really interesting to work in that kind of environment. Here in the UAE, there's, what is it, like a population of kind of 10 million people, I think, around that. And I think pretty much every nation is represented. There's probably like about 180 different nationalities represented in the UAE as expats. 80% of the population is expatriate. So there's a huge melting pot, you know, of different cultures, nationalities, religions, backgrounds, all sorts going on here. And it presents a really interesting, you know, challenge and opportunity for companies and teams, organizations here, that you don't get necessarily as much in other more culturally settled parts of the world. And I've done some coaching with teams in the UK, Europe, and in particular the UK, which is obviously my home culture. It was astonishing how different it is to see, you know, different teams which are mixed versus relatively monocultural, and notice, you know, how that plays out in you know, in their situations, their challenges, you know, how they do things, you know, and you know, learning how to not be judgmental of that. You know, it is what it is. It's not my job to judge the situation, but just work with it.
Yeah, I'm interested in what you said earlier on about actually going on some training around intercultural training. What sort of things would that have covered? Specifically,
there's a guy here called Marco Blankenberg who runs a company called KnowledgeWorks, and that's what he does. He trains people on intercultural intelligence. He's a highly experienced trainer, coach, working with, you know, he's worked all over the world with multicultural situations and teams. He's worked with tribes in Afghanistan. He's a former Dutch Marine, now lives out here, been in the Middle East for a long time, and his courses are specifically for people to navigate culture, and you know, to work in and with, you know, intercultural teams, and to be able to coach them. So you know, he has a certification program and kind of courses you can do, and I've done some of those. So like I say, I've done that, and also my coach training, relationship coaching, systems team coaching, you know, allows you to work with that with a different kind of mindset, with your attitude towards what is happening, and like I said, you know, without judgment. Learning to approach situations with curiosity, without your own kind of agenda, which is one of the big differences, moving from a kind of training-based approach to helping teams, which was based around, here's the model, we're going to train you how to do it this way, moving more towards a much more sort of fluid and open way of belief and a knowledge that the team itself has the answers. It seeks it, perhaps hasn't found them yet, and it's not your job to necessarily give them the answers. Your job is to create the right conversations and situations for them to find them within themselves. And so that approach allows, I think, for better work interculturally, because you learn not to judge the way people are doing things in any given team, because that's just the way they do things. It works for them. Maybe they're from different, you know, cultures. Maybe they've created their own culture. You're not to judge it as a coach. You work with it. So I think that those are the kind of, you know, and there are other people here, as there are in other parts of the world, who are intercultural coaches, trainers, experts. You know, there is training you can do to learn about it.
I'm interested in the idea of, you mentioned judgment a few times, and aside from the idea of coming and prejudging a culture, are there any natural traps that those types of teams can sometimes tend to fall into?
Well, I think, yeah. Unfortunately, the same as happens, you know, all over the world in many different situations. We subconsciously, people drift towards their comfort zones of people like us. And so they make assumptions, which is often innocent, and it's not their fault. It's just how cultures bring their people up. You know, that you bring your people up around you to be like you know, either very, you know, North Korea, right? in a very structured, very disciplined, authoritarian way, or just more organically in other cultures, where you just pick up. And so that's what you expect, and you apply that thinking without thinking about it to every situation that you face. And so we just fall into our natural ability to make judgment of behavior, of language, of how people look. We just judge, the unconscious bias. That's the biggest thing that we all do, and that's natural. And then the concept of the culture, the difference between a cultural critic and a cultural learner. And I use this in a coaching tool example, right? We have a tool which we use in coaching to try and generate greater empathy for, often when teams are not collaborating that well, and there's maybe different departments that are not getting on or something like that. When you've got different populations, and you can this tool was used, for example, reconciling people in South Africa as apartheid ended, trying to bring people back together. And if you remember, I think it was in 2011, there were the London riots in the UK. Mm-hmm. And when the fallout of that was a lot of mistrust between local residents, police, shopkeepers, people who were doing the rioting, and so to try and bring them back together, they used this tool, which is called Landswork. So it uses the metaphor of geography to be able to illustrate that I live in a land that's different to yours. What's my land like, and what's your land like? And I'm going to come ready to listen and be curious and non-judgmental about your land. And to do this, as a coach, I'm going to request that you become good tourists. And good tourists behave a certain way. And so when I'm using this in a room, with teams here, and I use it quite a lot because there is a lot of difference. I say to people, you're going to be a tourist today, and what we're not going to do is be a typical British tourist. What do the British tourists do? They get on the plane, they go to Spain. What's the first thing that they do? They go and find a British pub. They have a British pint of beer, a plate of bacon and eggs, and that's what they do all day, every day, and they get on the plane and they go home. And at no point do they eat the local food, speak the local language, talk to the locals, experience the local culture, go to a museum, do all those things which are kind of learning about and being respectful of and listening to what it's like and having empathy for the other culture. And so you say, that's not what we're going to do. We are going to be like that. So when you set it up in a room and you ask them to move physically from land to land, they get a chance to tell the other people what their land is like. And then team two, team one and team two, for example, team one says, here's our land, this is what it's like for us. And then they say, right, team one, step out of the way and invite team two to come into your land. And they step over the tape into the team one's land, and then I ask questions. What's it like here? What did you hear them say? What are some of the challenges that they face? And hopefully that they would have got that, the idea of being open-minded, listening, respectful. I want to hear what it's like for them, and getting that kind of like, wow, I heard them say it's stressful for them, and we cause some of that stress, and gosh, I can feel that over here, and that's what we need to try and do is to be able to encourage people to be less judgmental and critical as a default, and catch yourself, which is not easy, but learn the habits of being more open to curiosity and what's it like and what's that mean for me? How do I respect what they need? And is there some common ground that we can find together?
Yeah, I love that exercise. That's really cool. It's making me think of a group I worked with. I was co-facilitating on an event, and the other facilitator brought along this game to play with the group, and the theme of the event was about culture. Not the kind of culture that we're talking about here, which is kind of corporate culture. But I think it translated really nicely. The idea was that there were kind of all these little satellites of groups playing like a variation on a card game, a bit like Snap. But
this
a little
is
bit
a
like
game called Banga.
You'll know this. I'm sure you'll know this because
I use
exactly
it
to what you were just saying.
And
it's beautiful, and it's kind of in its simplicity. And the idea is, well, for the purpose of the listeners, because I think we know what we're talking about, is the game is played in silence after the rules are read, and then one by one people start switching to different groups and tables in silence and carry on playing the game. But of course, underneath the surface, every single group is playing a slightly different variation of that game with different rules, different ways of winning, different ways of competing and interacting. And it's just fascinating to reveal that stuff around. If given a free rein, what most people will do is take their culture, bring it to a new place, and then push it out to everyone else, assuming that they're playing the same game as you, with all the same rules. Whereas actually, I've seen people in that game, you must have had the same experience, get really frustrated and angry. I saw somebody march out of the room at one point because they were so cross with the way things had turned out and that no one was listening to them. But as you said, it was all about curiosity. The people that did really well actually stopped, looked, observed, and were able to adapt.
I've had some interesting experiences. Like you say, I've had people want to leave the room. What you do is you give them the written instructions, and then when they start playing the game, you quietly remove the written instructions. And then when they get to round 2 and they've moved to a different table, and an ace is no longer has the power that it had originally. Where's the rules? Where's the rules? And then other people back down. The more dominant people are grabbing the cards, and their response is to dominate and be forceful. They're more competitive. Other people are in fits of giggles because it's just hilarious for them. Other people are just checking out and like, oh, whatever, I'll just do and then people start working. It's really good. It's a really great game, and it's we use it all the time to illustrate what happens when we come up against a different way of doing things. And culture is this is the way we do things around here. And so if it's not the way I'm comfortable and I like it, I'm a human animal. I fear change and difference naturally, and there's good reason for that, because mostly in our existence in the past, the unknown and the different represented threat. So, if someone is different to us, we're going to be a bit wary. A little history lesson. Why do we drive on the left? Which countries drive on the left? Okay, so the UK, Australia, South Africa, Canada until recently, India, and everyone else, Sweden, everyone else drives on the right, right? And the answer is, in the old days, when you were going through the forest on your horse, if you met a stranger, you would pass the stranger on the left, because 90% of the population is right-handed, and you would leave your sword arm free to defend yourself against the person coming towards you. And so everyone used to pass on the left. And then when Napoleon came to power in France and conquered most of mainland Europe, he created a whole new calendar, currency, political system. He made everyone move and pass on the right just to be different. And the only people he didn't were the Brits, who he didn't conquer, and their colonies, and Scandinavia. So that's why the former British colonies, traditionally drive on the left, and everyone else, all the French colonies, Dutch colonies, Spanish colonies, all drive on the right. We're kind of, that's why castle staircases are spiraled clockwise, upwards. Because if you build the castle and you want to defend your castle, you want to be able to attack down the stairwell with your right hand, and the attackers have to kind of attack up the stairwell.
A more difficult job.
Which makes me think, if I was a soldier back in those days, I'd be pushed to the front of the queue at the castle attack because I'm left-handed. You're going to the front. Oh, okay. But these things are created. It's a default. We run with a default mechanism and wiring of mistrust and resistance to difference, and that's what we do. And I worked for a company here, 50, 60 people, and we would have company lunches. This was the award-winning good company, right? And everyone got on. It was really good culture. And then we'd do like a company lunch, informal, find a seat at a table. And this happens all the time. We had something like 13, 14 nationalities in that company, and you would get tables with the Filipinos on one table, the Indians on another table, the Brits on another table, and so on. Not because we didn't get on and like each other, but it's just this default that you go into. You just gravitate naturally towards the people like you. And that's one of the big overrides that you need to consciously do differently. And that awareness is the key. The first step is awareness.
Yeah. To what extent do you engage in that? Let's say if you're working with a group who have kind of culture or cultures that you haven't worked with before, how do you go about getting curious about how to integrate and adapt to what they need when you're working with them in a kind of consulting practice?
Sometimes it's part of the definitive, it's the definite brief is part of the situation, maybe a cultural mismatch, but it's true for everybody. Everyone's the same here, and I often just end up having this conversation anyway. And the first step is education. As a coach, sometimes you become an educator, initially, and you wear a different hat: facilitator, coach, trainer, and you just have to educate. And when that's the starting point, and say, here's what this is all about. And there's a couple of things I always use, which I learned from Marco. For example, the concept called the 3 colours of worldview, which is fundamental. It's the fundamental building block, the benchmark of working with different cultures. The concept being that everyone wears a set of spectacles that they, when little kids are born, they don't have the spectacles. They're completely filterless. And then as they grow up, they start to get these. It's like reverse peeling an onion. You just sort of layer up more and more, which comes very covertly or overtly. You learn from your parents, you learn from your school, your church, your mosque, whatever it is. And that's the lens that you look out on the world. Now, the 3 colours are 3 interconnecting Venn diagrams, which are not necessarily geographically based. Yes, traditionally loosely, but again, equally more and more these days, you can't judge people culturally by their nationality. They may, like me, I've been brought up in more countries than my home culture country. I might be a part of a mixed culture family. You never know. Loosely speaking, you can sort of group regionally, but you've got to be careful with that. Anyway, the 3 Venn diagrams. The first one is the lens of the spectrum of guilt and innocence. Guilt and innocence is perhaps more used to people from a Western background. It is a belief that you are right and wrong, and you're brought up to believe in contracts being absolutely worth everything that they're written on, rather than just the paper they're written on. You take it in turns. If no one sees you get it wrong, you are still guilty. It's kind of you could describe it as quite Catholic. You are guilty in the eyes of God, even if no one else sees you do it. So you don't want to be wrong, and you want to do the right thing. The second lens is the lens of shame and honor, and it's a much more public-facing lens of I want to bring honor to my people, my tribe. It's very present here in the Middle East, traditional tribal societies. I want to bring honor, and I want to avoid bringing shame upon me and the people around me visibly. I don't, to be seen to be shameful is a big driver. And then the third lens is the lens of fear and power and the hierarchical nature of culture and society, which is probably more traditional in parts of Asia, South Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia, where there's a strong ladder principle of pecking order, and where you are and where the power is in the room, and you know how to align with the power, and you know how to play your place. If you're up the tree, you will use direct communication downwards to keep people below you in line. And if you are down the bottom of the ladder, you don't speak upwards and challenge power. You will do things indirectly. So all three of these lenses, everyone sits on the diagram somewhere, and it's just this education piece. What are they like? How do they act? What do they do? How do they make judgments? What's present for you? Where are you? Where do you sit? Having gone through that education piece with a team, that's the first thing I do. I can then do an exercise using the Landswork principle of saying, well, look, we'll tape out 3 areas on the floor here, and I'll invite you. It's more of a constellation exercise. I would like you all to choose, where do you feel you are? Are you strongly in one, or do you stride over perhaps 2, or are you a bit in the middle? And then everyone kind of stands on the floor, and they constellate the system, the team. And that's always really interesting, because of course you make a judgment, and you think, oh, look at that, we've got 5 guys from the UAE, and we've got 3 Westerners and 2 from South Asia, and I'm pretty sure I know where they're all going to stand. And then again, I find myself being judgmental. And actually, you'd think that the Emiratis would stand in shame, honour, with a bit of fear, power, and less of the guilt, innocence, just because it's a regional thing. And then one or two of them might stand in guilt, innocence, and you don't know that they actually grew up living in the West. Maybe they were educated in America. You don't know that just because you're judging by what they look like. That they you're making an assumption. So. And then once you do that, then what you're doing as a coach there is revealing the system to itself, and you're showing them what they've got present. And what's that like? How does this play out in your relationships? Is there some friction between cultural groups? How do you create your own culture? If we remove the tape on the floor, how do you want your team culture to be? Do you want the best bits from each of you? And avoid, what are the bits you don't want that don't serve you? Do people feel that they're marginalised in some way? Perhaps they're the minority, which often happens. We marginalise minority voices. So that's the kind of beginning of getting people to understand the cultural mixes and how that works. And I think one of the really interesting things for teams is, for me, one of the main things is how does that cultural piece play out in people's willingness and ability to speak up and be honest and create a psychologically safe environment where I can be myself, I can express myself without fear of judgment, ridicule. I can challenge, I can say what I think, which is, I think, traditionally harder in some cultural aspects and cultural lenses than others.
Yeah. As you were talking, I was smiling. I was thinking back to all the number of times where I've got that so terribly wrong with groups because of my levels of cultural intelligence at the time. Two examples spring to mind. One of them is a really practical one that I think I'd never thought to even ask in the briefing stage of a piece of work, but I never forgot it. Again, it was the first time I ever did some work in Finland. And I was doing it was proper training then. It was a little bit of facilitation, but it was really kind of train the trainer work. And I was working with this group for over 3 days, and amazing training room. They actually had a sauna at the back of the room, which was kind of cool, which I'd never seen before. And I made the biggest kind of faux pas ever, which was I had taken the timetable that I would normally run that event to and just transported it finish time. And so that essentially looked like start at 9, morning break, go for lunch about 1, and then wrap up around 5-ish, depending on how we were doing. And I could see as we sort of got past the morning break, which was maybe around 10, half 10, people's eyes started kind of narrowing, and I got the sense I was losing the group on quite a big level, but I couldn't really put my finger on what was going wrong because they were still engaging and things were kind of going the actual flow of the day was going as planned, but I was getting this weird vibe from them that I'd made a huge mistake, but nobody said anything to me. And as it kind of got past sort of 11 o'clock, half 11, those kind of looks started to really intensify, and I could see people looking at each other almost as if to be saying, should we say something here? At this point, I was relatively green in my kind of facilitation coaching journey, so I didn't really have the confidence to stop proceedings and say, I'm just picking up on some stuff, can we just talk about that? Which I probably would now. As it turns out, in Finnish culture, you have lunch at 11 o'clock. If you're at half 11, that's late. And they all have lunch together, which is really nice as well. But so it meant everyone piles down to the cafeteria, gets the good stuff, all sits together, has a good chat, nice meal, and then the kind of the day continues. But because I'd left it at 1 o'clock, there was barely any food left, but also everyone was a bit grumpy and a bit kind of crotchety. So it was one of those things, and I did mention it at the time. Said, why didn't anybody say anything? I'm so sorry. I was kind of I felt a lot of shame about that and guilt. But it was a lesson I never forgot. I made sure every single event we ever scheduled in that part of the world was we checked it out, but also that it was never any later than half 11 that we would go for a lunch break. The second thing was in mainland China. I did some work out in mainland China for a group, a similar kind of deliverable around that sort of train the trainer work, and I approached it quite. I felt quite inclusively, in quite a facilitative way, And it became really clear over the course of the first couple of hours that actually what the group wanted from me, I'd been positioned as an expert in that setting, and I was asking them lots of open questions. What do we think about that? Has anyone got any thoughts about what we should do in this situation? That kind of thing. And it was just blank faces, and they had expected that I would tell them, and all the way down to, okay, if this person says this, you need to say this, this, and this next, and much more kind of directive, didactic kind of approach, which I wasn't really unfamiliar with, and it took me a little while to kind of dial into. But again, had I done my research, had I gotten a bit more curious ahead of time, I probably could have been better prepared for those situations.
Those are great examples of different cultures doing different things, and you were lucky. They weren't particularly offensive, but it can be deeply offensive if you get things wrong, especially here, and really insulting. If one of the things living here is that the nature of public criticism, which is deeply haram, is not allowed in Islamic tradition. So you cannot publicly defame people. Like there was a lady who posted a picture on Facebook of a car that had been parked across 2 parking bays in a supermarket car park, and she posted a picture. Look at this idiot! Look at the way they've parked. Isn't that terrible? And publicly shamed the driver, and she was deported from the country. That's not allowed. Wow. You're not allowed to do that. You can be you can easily offend, and you just have to. But again, it's just sensitivity, awareness, curiosity, respect. How do you show up in these situations? But I think the most interesting, going back to this concept of psychological safety and openness and speaking up in ORSC coaching, which I'm trained in, organization and relationship systems coaching, there's a big belief in a concept called deep democracy for relationships and teams to be able to democratically express themselves, to hear each other, to talk openly, which very much linked with that happens in a psychologically safe environment where openness and giving of feedback and really being honest about what's going on. And then when I learnt about these different cultures and both the fear power culture and the shame honor culture, I thought, that kind of doesn't work in those cultures. A fear power culture, they're not going to speak directly, openly, honestly upwards if you've got hierarchy in the room. And shame honor, you're not going to bring shame upon yourself publicly. You may not admit that you've made a mistake. You want to be strong and confident and powerful, and you won't talk about this stuff. And so I said, how's that going to work here? I do believe in it. It's necessary to, if you're going to overcome things in cultures and relationships, to be able to talk about stuff. And then I found out that ORSC has communities of coaches around the world, and they have a community of ORSC coaches in Japan. And I was like, wow, how did they work in Japan? Because Japan is a very traditional society. Business, is very hierarchical. It's a kind of, you can see the fear, power, shame, honor dynamics playing out in Japan. And I had the opportunity to speak to one of the Japanese ORSC coaches quite briefly. But I said to Yuri, okay, how does this work, right? How do you do deep democracy, psychological safety in those cultures where I just don't see that they would accept it? And she says, you know what? And this, I think, is really, really interesting when it comes to the kind of stuff when you're working with humans and cultures and relationships. What is the stuff that is common to all at a fundamental human level before you add those layers of cultural lenses that we all actually really want? And we really actually thrive in. And she said what she does in Japan is she has to introduce the concept of psychological safety, deep democracy, opening up slowly, and give them encouragement to try it on and to break down some of those lenses and remove some of the cultural kind of jackets that we wear and say, let's just strip this down. And she says, she runs exercises and educates, and she says they get it. There's a moment where they kind of get it, and somebody will go first. It takes a bit of courage, and someone will speak up and be open, and it will build, and then they kind of go, wow, and it really works for them. And so I think you can work consciously to remove the lenses perhaps temporarily, but in certain situations. And that's part of the necessary work of being able to navigate interculturally, is actually to be able to create your own culture, made up of the people in the room. We bring our experience, and we bring our knowledge, and we bring our preconceptions and our lenses and everything else. But if we can actually consciously choose which glasses we put on in that situation, then you can overcome the differences, and you can say what we stand for as a group here today, and then capture that and almost bottle it. And I've done this with teams where we create a charter, and it's very clear to everyone, this is what we stand for. And on our team here today, this is how we act, this is what we do. And that might bring the best of a bit of this and a bit of that, or whatever works for whatever they need to do. And then as new people join, before they join, they use that document in their interview process, and they say, if you want to come here, this is what this looks like, and this is how we are. So make sure you're happy with that before you say yes. And so that, that culture becomes something conscious and intentional and specific, that works for everybody. But I do, human beings have such commonality despite the cultural differences, ethnic differences, age, sex, politics, religion. There's fundamental stuff. We all want to belong. We all want to be trusted. We all want to have a purpose behind our lives. We want, is it Daniel Pink, mastery, autonomy and purpose. These are some of the things, we all want to belong. We all want to be part of something, No, why do we use solitary confinement as the most extreme form of non-physical punishment? Because it's extremely damaging to any human being, no matter what your culture is. We don't like to be alone. We want to be part of something. We are community animals. We need each other. We work better with other people. We can still be introverts, and we can still want time alone, but we don't want to be alone. And so some of these, and I've noticed this working, as I do with teams and people from all sorts of different cultures, that there is still common ground, no matter who you are. And it's getting people to understand that and find that, and what's their own common ground, and how can they just rub along better with the people that they are in the team with.
I love that, and I'm glad you mentioned team charters. I think that's been a big part of my practice with teams for a long time, because it's amazing how many teams just try and get by with guesswork when it comes to that sense of how are we going to be with each other? How do we want to work with each other? Can we agree? All of the things, the ways that we might trip ourselves up ahead of time, so that we can sort it out before it happens. And if we do get into conflict, let's talk about how we're going to manage it before it happens, rather than in the moment. It's such a simple thing to do, but it's a really powerful process.
It's not a simple thing to do for people to. People fear having conversations about conflict, understandably they worry about making it worse. They worry about being judged. And traditionally in this part of the world, I'm trained and equipped and able to deal with conflict in the coaching room with heat and argument and anger and everything else, but we rarely see it. Because in this part of the world, you've got the culture, some cultures don't do it. They won't speak upward. Yeah. People's jobs, traditionally here it is changing, but there was, until relatively recently, there was no income protection. If you lost your job, you had 30 days to get out of the country. Your visa was dependent upon your job, and so you didn't want to risk your visa. And so you don't want to, I'm not going to, speak out of turn here. I'm just going to do, say yes and kowtow and so people would not naturally get into an argumentative situation. And I've got a friend, Cecil, who does what I do. He used to work here. He's from South Africa. Now he practices down in Cape Town, and he sees it, more in Cape Town. And he had a couple of incredible stories of conflict in teams, and I was like, wow, I just never see that level, in the coaching room. And he said, no, you're probably less likely to in working where you are for those reasons. But equally, all teams, so few teams that I start working with have ever consciously designed their culture and sat down, This is who we are. This is what we do. Here's our charter. So few. Everyone leaves it up to chance. And you might get lucky. Some just get lucky. You're probably more likely to get it right if you are all from the same background, the same culture. And again, like I say, I've worked with a couple of teams in the UK, one in Edinburgh, one in London, where everyone was white, British, no kind of recent immigration into the country, into the team, very similar people, and that it was really interesting to work with that dynamic coming from I just assume that I'm going to be dealing with multicultural teams, and then suddenly I'm presented with a monocultural team, and that was a really interesting experience. But it was my home culture, and one of the things there was the use of sarcasm. Which is an interesting thing, and how sarcasm is used in team. Britain has a very particular sense of humour. There was a lot of taking the mickey out of people, sarcasm, and that was really interesting because it doesn't happen as much here. You've got to be very careful with that. I believe that there is no direct translation for the word sarcasm in Chinese, in the Chinese language, because they just don't do it. They will take things very literally. That was an interesting observation with that team, those teams.
If you can imagine someone who is about to join a multicultural team, having not been in such a diverse team before, what advice might you give to them in terms of adjusting, aligning, getting curious? What could be some practical tips for them getting involved if they didn't have access to somebody like you, like a coach, or that hadn't been supplied for them? I
think the main thing is curiosity, and don't impose your way of doing things. You will naturally without thinking about it, but just find out, ask lots of questions, be curious about others. No, none of those lenses is better or than the other, or right versus wrong. It's just different, and they're going to do things differently, and it might annoy you, it might be confusing, but be curious. Why am I being annoyed by this? Why do they do that? How can we work together on this? And there's a great tool that we use called the DIR method, which is when you see a situation, DIR stands for describe, interpret, respond. And it's just, you have to just get practiced at it, and it's not easy. But the describe is, what are the facts here? And in the training room or the coaching room, I use pictures. I show people a picture of a situation. It could be anything. There's one where there is 8 guys in blue jumpsuits with sledgehammers smashing up a Lamborghini. And so I show the group and I say, right, let's use DIR. Describe what you're seeing. And people will go, oh, but look, they're vandalising that car. Wait a minute. No, that's your response. Describe it, first of all. Well, there are 8 guys with sledgehammers hitting a Lamborghini. That's the description. That's the dispassionate, non-judgmental, that's just what I see. How do I interpret that? What is the story here? What is happening? And how am I responding to it emotionally? What's my response? Oh, how dare they beat up that car? That's breaking the rules. Well, the real answer is that the owner of the car he had a Friday afternoon lemon of a car. The car had come off the production line on a Friday afternoon and it kept breaking down, and he was annoyed by Lamborghini's service level. And so as a protest, he paid these guys to publicly destroy his car to kind of bring, bad publicity to Lamborghini. So, other people had different interpretations of that. So just be careful about what is it that you see? What's the truth here? What are the facts before you leap to judgment and interpretation? And then move forward. So don't make snap decisions. Try and catch yourself. Learn about your colleagues, the team that you're joining. Have some informal, have a coffee, ask them, how do they like doing things, and just be sensitive and be empathetic to, what other people do, and also telling them how you like to do things. Even things like timekeeping, right? You might get really, really annoyed because people are always late to the meeting that you call. But in their culture, that's okay. That's how they do things. You know, it's okay for them to arrive 5-10 minutes late. You know, so that's a big one. Timekeeping, because they are, you know, different cultures do timekeeping. Like you said, lunch at 11.
Yes.
You know, prayer time here. You know, watch out for, you know, people who might want to go, and especially the big prayer on a Friday afternoon. You know, don't organise a team meeting on Friday prayer time. Now that here in the UAE we're working on a Friday now, which we didn't used to. You know, just cultural, you know, sensitivity to how people want to do things.
I love that model, DIR, because I've been sort of sat here with my kind of psychology brain has been thinking about, okay, how does that work in terms of perception? How does culture shape perception? Because I'm thinking about kind of culture as we've been talking about it as something that gives us context. It gives us a model for how we can attribute context, and then context kind of shapes our meaning of and our interpretation of how we view certain things. Back to bias that you were talking about. And unless we have a way to interrogate our perception of what's happening around us, whether it's culture, whether it's behavior or anything else, then it becomes really difficult to pull yourself back from just defaulting to your existing model, because that's the way your brain's designed itself to do that. It's a pattern predictor. Yeah. Unless you've given yourself someone else's model of the world to kind of look at it and say, well, do I buy that? Is there another way of looking at that? Have I just used my own model, my own lens to kind of interrogate that? It's really difficult.
You're never going to get it right all the time. But yeah, it's neural pathways. We understand now that we can rewire the parts of the way we think and parts of the brain. You know. So it's just a habit and a practice and awareness, and you know, maybe, like, I think it's important, you know, in teams to create those opportunities to check in with each other. You know, I had a friend who was a boss he took over a new team, and day one, I presume the previous boss wasn't as open as Jerry and didn't invite feedback from below. And when he joined the team, first day and end of day one, excuse my French here, he said to the team, well, good day today, guys. Have I done anything to piss you off today? And the team kind of looked at him like, what? You know, he invited their feedback, but they didn't feel able to give it at that point in time. And then in day two, he said the same thing, day three, and he said it every day. You know, he built the habit, built the pathway. And eventually somebody said, actually, yeah, you did do something today. Oh, okay. Well, you know, and I use that just to kind of give you the example of a habit that the team can create of giving and receiving feedback, so that if you are making cultural missteps accidentally, you know, and people can hold on to them. You know, they can, you know, he did that thing. Oh, he was disrespectful of my culture, even though the person did it accidentally. So if you can create more openness and say, and have specific occasions, it doesn't have to be long, where you might say, have I pissed anyone off today or this week or whatever? Well, actually, yeah, you know, okay, I didn't know, you know, and you just creating dialogue and creating awareness and understanding and overcoming. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Yeah, well, in our culture, we, you know, and they may not speak, again, the speaking up thing is huge. They may not challenge openly, you know, directly. You may need to sort of navigate carefully, privately, you know, around in back channels and hear from other people in the team. And I get a lot of Western leaders here who get really annoyed because they say to me, you know, I get really, really annoyed because I tell the guys a lot of the blue collar workers are from South Asia, you know, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, countries like that. And then they say, I ask them to do something and they say yes. And I kind of think, I don't think they'll be able to do it. And then they don't do it. And they don't come and tell me that they haven't done it. And I'm like, why don't they do that? And then I explain the fear-power dynamic. And they're like, oh, that's why they don't do it. I said, they're never going to say no to you. You're the boss. You're the big boss. Of course they're going to say yes. They cannot say no to you. It's in their culture. So you have to find ways of being able to give them, you know, a way of doing it differently, and maybe go further to ask someone else to ask them. Yeah,
a way of making it seem like you're saving face by them saying no to you, I suppose. Yeah. Oh, goodness me. This has been full of of insights and ideas and loads of things I know that our listeners will be able to take away and work on. Thank you so much for sharing this, Andy. It's been great.
You're very welcome.
If anybody wanted to find out a bit more about you and how you work and what sort of projects you get involved in, how can people find you?
Probably best through my website, theteamspace.com, or look me up, connect with me on LinkedIn, Andy Fieldhouse on LinkedIn. You should. There aren't many of us. Fieldhouse is a relatively rare name, so you should find me.
Thanks again, Andy, and hopefully see you next time.
If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know by subscribing and leaving a review on your favourite podcast app. Meanwhile, if you're interested to learn more about how the PCS approach can help you explore leadership, performance and culture within your business, get in touch with our team at performanceclimatesystem.com and we'll be happy to help. See you next time with another great guest.